Okay, today we're going to make macaroni cheese. The ingredients you'll find on Teams, on the macaroni cheese folder in recipes. And you need 100 grams of macaroni, you need 100 grams of cheese, 25 grams of butter, 25 grams of plain flour and 250 millilitres of milk. If you can't get macaroni, any pasta will be fine, okay? So I have measured out the flour, butter and milk, macaroni, and I'm ready to grate my cheese. I've also put a pan of water on to boil, ready to cook the macaroni. I looked at the packet first and it said that it needed to cook for 10 minutes. So once that water comes to the boil, I'm going to put it on and time it. If you're using other pasta, then you'll need to look at the back of the packet because different types of pasta cooks for different lengths of time. When you grate the cheese, girls, depending on what your grater is like at home, I'm going to use this small hole here because it will make the cheese nice and small, which will melt into the sauce really nicely. And when you're grating, can you remember to make sure that you use the flat of your hand if possible, otherwise you'll grate your fingernails in there, which is a bit ouchy and a bit crunchy. The water needs to be boiling before you put the macaroni in or the pasta in. That is boiling. Little bubbles aren't enough, it's got to be erupting from the surface. Once it goes in, make sure you don't put a lid back on if you have had a lid on, otherwise it will boil over, and give it a quick stir. Once the water comes back up to the boil again, you'll need to turn the pan down, otherwise it will boil over, and then you need to time it for 10 minutes. So that's boiling again now. I'm going to turn it down a little bit and I'm going to time that for 10 minutes, by which point the macaroni should be cooked. Meanwhile, I'm going to make my sauce. So I've got a little saucepan and I'm going to put that on a fairly lowish heat. I'm adding 25 grams of butter to that, and when the butter is melted I'm going to add the other ingredients. When you're making a sauce, girls, it's really important that you have all of your ingredients ready because you must stir it all of the time. So we're melting the butter. Once the butter is melted, we're going to add the flour to this, and we're going to stir all the flour in so that it forms a ball. This is called a roux, spelt R-O-U-X, and it's basically just a flour and butter ball. You need to make sure when you're stirring it, girls, that you get right into the edges of the pan. You can see that's what I'm doing here, because if you don't, then it will burn on the edges. So I'm now turning it down to really quite a low heat, and I'm going to start adding milk a little bit at a time. Every time I add a little bit of milk, I need to really give it a good stir to mix all of that milk in before I add more. And I'm going to get right into the edges of the pan and right across the bottom. What's happening here is that the starch in the flour is reacting to the heat and the liquid, and the starch, as it heats up, is absorbing the liquid and it's expanding. And if you don't keep stirring the starch, as it expands, it will naturally form lumps, and that's what we're trying to avoid, which is why it's important to have everything ready before you start making a sauce so that you can continue to stir it at all times. Make sure when you're stirring that you get right into the edges of the pan and get rid of all of the lumps each time, and get all of that sauce blended in, the milk blended in, before you add any more. So what's happening is this starch is absorbing the liquid and it's expanding, and as it gets hotter and hotter, the starch granules start to burst open. They release a bit of a jelly. And that process is called gelatinisation. And when the jelly is released, that is what thickens the sauce. And this process starts at 60 degrees and continues right through until the liquid reaches 100 degrees or boiling point. So you know once the sauce starts to bubble that any starch granules that need to burst have burst. And you know that you can probably safely stop stirring it all the time once it starts to bubble, because it's not going to try and form lumps anymore. Okay, so I've now got all of my milk incorporated, and all I'm going to do now is I'm going to keep stirring this until this milky sauce reaches boiling point. Sometimes when you're stirring these sauces, you think it's never going to thicken and it's just really thin, and often you find that it happens really all of a sudden, and it would seem that all of the starch granules burst at pretty much the same time and it will suddenly just get thick. But it's really important that you don't stop stirring, because you need to prevent all of those lumps from forming. These white sauces are very versatile. You can use them to make lasagna, you can use them to make fish pie, cauliflower cheese, all sorts of things. And this is a basic mac and cheese with nothing else in it, but you could add all sorts of bits and pieces to this to make it taste good. Different vegetables or some bacon or chicken. And there we go. You can see that the sauce is now boiling. So once we reach this point, we know that gelatinisation has occurred. We know that all of the starch granules have burst. We need that on the lowest heat possible, and we're going to add probably 3/4 of our cheese to this now. And that should just melt in. It's now been boiling for 10 minutes. I'm going to drain that in a sieve over the sink. I'm just going to rinse it out. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add this macaroni to the cheese sauce. Just carefully mix it all in together. And once the grill's on, it's important that you leave the grill door open. Into the dish that I'm using to serve it in. And then I'm going to sprinkle the remaining cheese on the top. I'm going to finish it off with a little slice of tomato. And then I'm going to pop that underneath the grill until the cheese is melted and nicely golden brown.